Hi, this is Chris from Orange Coast College's Art Department with a brief overview on the hue, saturation, and brightness adjustments. Now, if you haven't already seen the adjustment layers video, I suggest you take a look at that first because we're going to dive in a little deeper on the hue, saturation adjustment. So to access this, I'm going to come over here to my layers palette and click the adjustment layers button and hop on down here to the hue and saturation adjustments. And what this is good for is skewing color and also desaturating or increasing the saturation. You'll notice as we look at this properties box that pops up when we have a new adjustment layer for hue and saturation, we've got very similar to HSB, hue, saturation, brightness, but in this case it's called lightness. The hue will shift your hue along the color spectrum. Saturation, as you can imagine, will desaturate or increase saturation. And lightness will make it lighter and darker. To start off, just skip the whole lightness part. If you want to adjust your values, use levels. That's the best way to go about it. So the real value I find is in skewing the hue, changing the saturation, and every once in a while colorizing. Let's take first a look at this Titan poster here, and let's change the color palette just broadly. And we can do that by dragging our slider on the color spectrum. And so we're just skewing the color, and sometimes you just need it a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler. Here we've got primarily a yellow, and we can send it a little bit more to green by going to the right, or we can send it a little bit more to orange by going to the left, or we can make some really dramatic changes, as you can see by dragging along here. Let's reset that and compare that to colorize. So if I check the colorize box, what this will do will put a single hue over the whole image, and I can change my saturation. So here my hue is a warm red, and I can change that. I can go to yellows and greens and anywhere on the spectrum, and I can colorize. But what this is doing is it's making it monochromatic. It's all one hue. And as I mentioned, we can adjust our saturation. Now compare that to just shifting or skewing the hue. If we come over here into these reds, we've still got red and orange and red-violet going on in there. Or if we come on over here into the blue-greens, we've still got green, we've got blue-green, we've got blue. And so we've still got the same spread of hues, it's shifted along in the spectrum. So you can use both of those techniques. I'm going to reset once again. Let's say that you just wanted to skew some of the color. Let's go ahead and pick the red oranges. So normally this comes up under master, but I can go ahead and pick one of these primaries or secondaries, or I can use this button and click in. So I selected that button. I'm going to go ahead and click in the red orange. And what that does is it goes ahead and samples the color and jumps me into that range. So if you notice down here on our two color strips, we've got a few brackets. This bracket right down above my cursor, in the center, that lighter gray, it's going to affect those colors 100%. And then those two side brackets are the fall off. So it'll give you a little bit of some feathering effect there. And I can drag this along and change my mind there. But by clicking into this bar, I can jump it around. So here I'm clicking into the yellows and it's switching to yellows, but really what I'm after is changing those reds. Now, if we tighten this up and we get out of the yellows completely, I can just shift the reds and leave the yellows where they were. So that's a way to get a little bit more of a fine-grained approach to doing some color shifting. Now some people use replace color adjustment, some people use selective color adjustment. I like the hue and saturation because it also gives me the opportunity to come in here like this. And so now I can get in here and I can make a complementary color scheme by shifting those reds to some purples, keeping my yellows, and maybe let's go ahead and shift our yellows just a wee bit. Let's make them slightly greener, and that'll really give me even more of a complementary color scheme. All right, so pretty interesting way to make some adjustments there. Now let's take a look at another example and increase saturation, decrease saturation. So let's go ahead and add a hue saturation adjustment layer. And let's say this is a little too vibrant for us. We want to knock it down a little bit. I'm just going to go ahead and drag on the saturation scale until I find something that I think I like. Or it's not saturated enough. Let's really punch those hues and make them much more saturated. So this is a great way to desaturate primarily. It's not too often I'm increasing saturation, but it's very often that I'm decreasing saturation. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll go ahead and decrease it completely. And then while this layer is selected, I'm going to go ahead and use my keyboard and go ahead and cycle through by punching the keys the opacity of the layer. So if you take a look right up here in my opacity box, I'm going to, I hit 9, that's 90%, 8, 80%, 70, 60, 50. And I may sit here and just toggle between them, go 30, 50, 30, 50, maybe 20. And I can use my keyboard to dial those in to get it exactly how much desaturation I want. I can always drag that slider, but sometimes it's a little fussy to do that. So I can just go ahead and use my keyboard if I want to get it just right. And I use this technique all the time. So to recap, hue saturation adjustment layer, really handy. I use it mostly for the changing the saturation and sometimes for skewing the hue. And I rarely use the lightness because it tends to make things a little more. And I rarely use the lightness because it doesn't make the changes that I'm looking for the way a levels or a curves adjustment layer will do it. So often I'll work a levels adjustment in combination with the hue and saturation adjustment layer. And that's all I ever need. Also, don't forget that you can use both the layer mask for this adjustment layer or use it in a clipping group situation to selectively pick where in your artwork you want to have these effects take place. So start experimenting with the hue and saturation adjustment layers as well as your levels adjustment, and keep making great art.